Hey guys, CS Joseph of csjoseph.life again, doing another lecture on virtue and vice. Tonight's type is the ENTP, also known as the originator or the visionary, the Steve Jobs or Benjamin Franklin type, although that's currently being discussed in another thread on a video on this channel somewhere. I'll figure it out. Also, shout out to Blabbersoft. I enjoy our discussion about how you believe I'm still an ENTJ, but fair enough. I mean, I'm not the most perfect human being in the world, so I'm definitely open to suggestions, right? Anyway, on to the material. So, the virtue and vice of the ENTP, the originator type, this one hits close to home because it's mine, right? I didn't actually become aware of it until one of my mentors pointed it out, because he has an ENTP daughter, who is smoking hot, by the way, but not really down for those ENTP on ENTP relationships. So, anyway, he basically told me one day that she was like the biggest liar he's ever known in his whole life. And, I mean, he's not wrong. The virtue of the ENTP is sincerity. We are insanely sincere. To a fault. It's like, okay, yeah, we're going to tell the truth and be super harsh about it. I mean, most people would say that our virtue and vice is harshness versus gentleness. But I'm sorry, an ENTP is just not gentle. Not really. I mean, oh, but they can be so nurturing with their ISFJ subconscious. Yeah, sure they can. I mean, I believe that and I agree that, but it's not from the point of giving someone a good experience, because I don't care that much about the experience I'm giving to others. I care more about the experience I'm receiving for others. But I do care about how people feel. You know, unlike the ENTJ, who doesn't. The ENTJ just cares about how they feel, how they value themselves, right? But because of how much they value themselves, they're also concerned about what other people think about them. I really don't care about what other people think about me. I care about how people feel about me, but I don't care about what people think of me. It's two different things, you know, rationale versus ethics, right? So, what is the vice of the ENTP? So, virtue is sincerity. The vice is insincerity, right? ENTPs are notorious for being super fake. Now, okay, yeah, sure, you can make the argument that the ENFP is even more fake than an ENTP, but there's a difference. One is doing it willfully, and that's the ENTP. The other is not. TI Trickster, which basically causes ENFPs to be amusing, you know, without thought. That's the definition. Because they're so focused on their morals, and they're so focused on what other people are thinking, and focused on those reference points with their material, that they don't have time to think for themselves, basically. They have time to feel for themselves and believe things are good or bad, but when it comes to thinking about, it's true or false, they don't do it. Because of that, they come off as being fake, sometimes slippery, which they are really slick, don't get me wrong. But the ENTP, however, when it comes to insincerity and lying, falsehood, it's intentional. It's intentional almost all the time. In fact, insincerity can get so bad that the ENTP themselves actually start to believe the lies they're telling other people. ENTPs are the masters of embellishment, and that is basically because, and hyperbole and blowing everything out of proportion, right? I do it all the time. Consistently. I guarantee this audience has basically seen me use tons of hyperbole so far. I mean, come on. I'm an ENTP. That's what I do. I'm hyperbolic in literally everything, you know? So, why though? Why do ENTPs do this? Well, for a lot of reasons. ENTPs have the ability to stretch the truth. You can always catch an ENTP in their dishonesty when they start saying things like maybe or might. That might happen, or that may happen, or if you may, right? Always be on guard when you see an ENTP start talking in euphemisms. Because if they're talking in euphemisms, they're lying. They are lying in some capacity, and they can use that stretch of truth to manipulate people in a serious way. Emotionally manipulate people, I would like to add. ENFPs, they're all about thought manipulation, manipulating the ideas of other people, but ENTPs can manipulate the feelings of other people. Oh, but an ENTP is a thinker, not a feeler. Yeah, well, for those of you that are not educated in the cognitive functions and spend a lot of time focusing on letters, like, seriously stop. Just because it says F doesn't mean they're not a thinker. Again, the INFJ is actually a thinker because of TI child, because they have introverted thinking child. If you have introverted thinking in one of your top floor slots in your ego, that makes you a thinker. I don't care what the MBTI says if you're an F or a T. In fact, just throw that away. That's garbage. Like, don't even pay attention to that. I only use the letters because that's the labels people are used to for the 16 archetypes. But I would be perfectly happy if they didn't exist or even matter, because they don't, because cognitive functions matter, interaction styles matter, temperaments matter. Who cares? Well, apparently a lot of people do, because they don't want to spend the time doing the research, and they'd rather just listen to the experts instead of doing the research on their own and figuring it out on their own. Now, that does not necessarily make them bad, and that doesn't necessarily make them lazy. It just means, well, you know, they're ignorant. Anyway, sincerity versus insincerity. So when ENTPs are young, they have this problem where they get so insanely blunt that they're just telling the truth, or what they believe is true, to anyone, regardless of the consequences of their actions. They don't care how other people feel about what they say, because it's like, the truth is the truth is the truth is the truth. I'm going to tell you the truth, and I don't care how you feel about it. They do this in their immaturity. And then they start to alienate people. And people end up being alienated by the ENTP. So SI inferior kicks in and starts to remember that it's alienating people, because no one values having the ENTP around, because TI parent is alienating everyone because it's constantly telling everyone the truth. Because, I'm sorry, when you tell the truth, no one likes to hear what's actually true, because it doesn't make them feel good. Yeah, well, guys, I'm sorry, but you can't. The only way to gain wisdom is through suffering, actually. I can't just comfort you into wisdom. I can't comfort you into enlightenment. I'm sorry, enlightenment comes from fire, because you're lit on fire, right? Enlightened fire. It burns, it hurts, it cleanses, burns the lies away, right? That's what TI parent does. TI parent exists to burn the lies away like hellfire would. But that's the problem. It's a consistent problem for ENTPs. So they're so sincere with people, and very few people appreciate the sincerity. TE heroes do, TE parents do, sometimes TE child, but that's rare. TE inferior never does. And it just goes on from there. It just gets worse and worse and worse and worse. Well, there's not very many TE heroes. There's not very many TE parents. So it's hard for... And the ENTP ends up not able to have those social relationships, but in the working area, in their careers, ENTPs can. And ENTPs can be sincere from those working relationships. We'll talk more about working compatibility, because there's different kinds of compatibility. And when I do my compatibility videos for all the types, I'm going to be talking about general compatibility, sexual compatibility. I'm also going to be talking about working compatibility as well. Each of these things have different approaches. So early on, the ENTP basically is just... they learn quick that they just can't tell the truth. So what do they end up doing? What's the limitation? So what the ENTP learns to do is put on a mask and literally treat every single person that they encounter differently. If they've never encountered the person before, they'll go into their ISFJ behind the scenes mode, and they'll be behind the scenes to collect data on the person, to collect information on the person, so that they can get to know them better, so they know what kind of mask to wear with this person, right? Gosh, I'm spilling out all my secrets. Anyway, that's why it's important. It's important because people need to realize that, is an ENTP really being sincere with you or not? Well, ENTPs have been conditioned by society, or because of their own selfish desires, or their desire to get ahead, and they don't care. In a lot of cases, a lot of ENTPs just don't care about the damage caused to fellow human beings as a result of their insincerity, right? Because they're just trying to take advantage of people a lot of the times. Because they don't really care. They care more about themselves than other people, right? They care about the experience that they're trying to receive. I mean, ENTPs can kind of go in this depravity mode because of SI inferior, where they get super selfish. Not as bad as some of the other types, but it still happens. And so they use their TI parent and their insincerity to manipulate people when they're being in this depraved mode. But most of the time, it's because they're uncomfortable and trying to figure out what kind of mask they need to wear when they're around other people. The mask is super important because the ENTP knows that the ENTP just can't share its brilliance or start telling the truth to people, because people have bad emotional reactions, typically, to truth, or to what the ENTP perceives as true. And even though, by and large, TI parent is actually right most of the time, then you start having situations where, well, it's so right, you're wrong, because you're alienating people. So ENTPs are very aware, as they mature, TI parent, after being so sincere with everybody, actually starts to backfire and alienate people. So we have to become insincere and create this mask. The problem is, when we put on these masks to temper our truth, we actually end up becoming the lie. We end up becoming the lie, believing the lie, and becoming one with the lie. And after a while, the ENTP, it almost seems like they can't tell the difference. Deep down, they really can, but to outsiders, it's really hard. That's why ENTPs are seen as shifty, creepy, people with ill intent. People assume they're edgy. People assume they're like mafia hitman. You never know what they're going to do next. Of course, because they're chaotic neutral. That's their trope, right? We'll do a video series on tropes later, but chaotic neutral. The ENTP is going to save your life one day, and the following day they're going to steal your car. Chaotic neutral. So the ENTP has identified the mask it's going to wear with this particular person, and it puts on the mask. And ENTPs are so good at their masks. They're so good at lying. They can remember every lie that they've told, and they can keep it going for the longest time, and they can manage it perfectly. Why? Because here's the secret of the ENTP falsehood and insincerity powers. It goes like this. I learned it from a fellow ENTP a couple years back when he was training me about security and social engineering. By the way, ENTPs and ENFPs and INTJs and INFJs are dope at social engineering. Probably the dopest. So, anyway, he taught me something important about lying. He said, the best lies are the lies that you can make come true. ENTPs, when they're embellishing, when they're being insincere, they know that because they could see into the future with their expert intuition hero, that they mix in truth with the lies. So much truth that if they actually did a little bit more effort, like added stimuli to the conversation, brought in additional people at certain points in time, kind of like a chessboard, right, with their INTJ strategic shadow, the ENTP could actually make the lie come true, which only causes their target to believe that they're that much more credible, right? And they always have contingency plans in their mind for when they may have to make a lie come true, just in case to keep up their credibility. They always have contingencies upon contingencies for every single half-truth or lie that they tell. What does this mean? Well, ENTPs are the best liars of all the types. They lie consistently and on a regular basis. And that's one of the biggest problems that we face with them every single day. It's one of the biggest struggles that I have as well. So how do you deal with that? What you got to do is you got to corner the ENTP, and you have to pin them down, and you have to ask them to be direct. By forcing that directness with them, they are basically, you have to query them and start asking them questions. And if something doesn't add up, or if they start using euphemisms, that's the big tell, is when they start using euphemisms, you know you got them. So you have to make sure you're checking for euphemisms, because they will oscillate quickly between being absolutely completely sincere and then going boom, insincere, and you don't even know they've changed. You don't even know. You have no pattern of behavior with which to measure it, because they're mixing in truth with the lies, and it's so hard to tell because it gets insanely entangled. This is the wickedness of ENTPs. Why? Because wicked comes from the term wicker basket, because it's truth woven in with lies. And it's super hard to tell the difference. It's super hard to figure out why or how any of this works, right? So my recommendation is, and it's especially difficult for NJs, who I would tell ENTPs to be in relationships with. NJs have a hard time remembering things. So NJs, if you're dealing with ENTPs, stressing yourself out and getting an ENTP on text chat is super important, because you can always go back to logs and bring it up from the past to prove points and to prove that they're lying to you. Always challenge them on the area of truth and what is actually true, because what is actually true is something you can extract out of the ENTP. And if the ENTP is caught, depends on how depraved they are. They'll either tell you, like, well, they'll admit it, they'll take full responsibility right there, or they'll try to weave in more lies. Be careful though, because if you're wrong and they are actually being truthful, then it's really hard to tell. The ENTP will take it personally, and then they'll lose loyalty for you. Their loyalty to you will start to fade. It's so unfair. They're so slippery and you can't tell, right? It's wrong. And I admit it. I do this to people. I fully admit it. I regret it. But at the same time, I also regret that this society we live in, this first world society and it's all its stupid bias, is not allowing me to be sincere. I can't just be sincere with everybody. I have to put a mask on for 95% of every human being I ever come into contact with, and I am super frustrated by that. I don't know why. I'm thinking it's a cultural thing, because if you go into Japan, they're very NT focused or very NJ focused, and they appreciate ENTPs there in Japan. But you come to this SJ society, UK, Australia, actually Australia is more SP, United States of America, SJ based society. That society continues to be a problem because ENTPs can't be sincere. The sincerity is the problem. Why else do you think Benjamin Franklin would write his messages or his Poor Richard's Almanac using satire? Because he could never be direct. ENTPs have to be indirect. Oh wait, they're informative. So that means they're indirect anyway. They're not going to be direct with you. Watch out for the euphemisms. That's the tell. As soon as you start hearing the euphemisms, you're like, oh, hold on. To be able to make sure that your ENTP is talking truth to you, you have to get them to talk in absolutes. Make sure they talk in absolutes. If I'm talking in absolutes, only a Sith deals in absolutes. If I'm talking in absolutes, you know I'm being sincere. If I'm talking in euphemisms, it's usually a lie. It's usually embellishment. It's usually a problem. Hold ENTPs accountable. Hold me accountable. It's one of my biggest problems. Well, it is my biggest problem. It's my primary vice. Insincerity. The problem is, as an ENTP, at times I feel like I have no choice but to be insincere in order to survive. Because to an ENTP, the ends always justify the means. And if that means I have to lie for the sake of good, at least what I perceive as good, which is difficult anyway, because I have FI trickster, so that's a whole nother conundrum in its own right. And what I believe is good is not very accurately good. It's very hard. It's very, very hard. Another way to deal with the insincerity is to make the ENTPs super comfortable. By making them comfortable, they are comfortable enough around you to start speaking in absolutes, and they will take the mask off and they will be real with you, 100% real. The problem is it'll take them a while to acclimate to you because the ENTPs don't really trust anyone. They don't trust anyone to be able to handle the absolute truth that they are trying to speak. This is why they really go well with NTJs, because that's all NTJs want. They just want facts and they just want the truth. And ENTPs can provide it to them. That's the point. That's why they have such a great relationship. ENTJ's like, I'm aware of what you think and you're aware of what you think and you're aware of what I want and I'm aware of what I want. Let's be friends, right? That's how it works. ENTPs are able to have those relationships with those rarer types because of that. And because those rarer types, NTJs, for example, are willing to listen to the ENTP and allow them to talk in absolutes, even at the risk of them sounding super harsh or dickish, that ENTP will be loyal to them forever and love them deeply and love the experience that they're receiving from the NTJs, because the NTJs are giving them enough room, unlike the other 14 types, 13 types, well, technically 12, because INTPs allow ENTPs to tell the truth, because INTPs have to tell the truth too, similarly. But INTPs don't feel like they're so insecure about how other people feel about them that they're not willing to put the mask on, even though sometimes they do. And they learn as they get older that they have to, but it's usually slower. ENTPs have to learn it right away. It's one of the very first skills that they learn, how to change themselves when they're around others. And especially in a public setting, the ENTP, you can almost immediately assume that they're not really being who they are, that they're not being sincere. Why? Well, it's because they're afraid. They're afraid that if they share their brilliance, they're afraid that if they start speaking absolute truth, that they will be alienating others and that they will be alone. So because of this fear, they put on the mask, they put on the insincerity, and they don't let it happen. But remember, they can end up in a situation where they become the lie. They become the insincerity because they're so used to wearing the mask that after a while, that's all SI inferior knows. And it's even worse when their SI inferior is depraved. And through that depravity, the ENTP ends up living the lie and not living in truth. That's why it's important for the ENTP to have NTJs in their life to give them that free thinking space where they can tell their absolute truth with all of their fiery fury, with all the harshness in the world, and the NTJ is like, meh, at least you're telling the truth. That's all I want. The ENTP is like, oh, thank God. And then, because of that, the ENTP can take off their mask and live free because they can free think at last. If you found this lecture insightful, helpful, educational, please subscribe to the channel here on YouTube and on the podcast. That would be fantastic. If you have any questions about ENTPs or their virtue and vice, please leave it in the comment section of this lecture, and I will do my best to answer your questions or concerns. The next type I'll be doing is the ENFP, their virtue and vice, which is interesting. We slightly touched on it tonight in this video, so that'll be fantastic. Anyway, I'll see you guys tonight.